Hello and welcome to Better Workdays, a show dedicated to helping everyday professionals create better days at work. I'm your host, Andy Morrison from Real Custom Training, where we design and deliver professional development workshops that are relevant, engaging, actionable, and lasting. Each week on Better Workdays, we'll be taking a look at a specific concept, skill, or story that we use in our workshops. We'll make sure that they're easy to understand, fun to learn about, and most importantly, that they can be applied immediately in the workplace as soon as you finish the episode. Thank you for joining us. It's time for Better Workdays from Real Custom Training. Hey everyone, welcome back to Better Workdays. I'm your host, Andy Morrison from Real Custom Training, where we help companies develop leaders at all levels. One of the ways we help companies do that is through the development of communication skills. And there's no more important communication skill than active listening. In fact, I like to say you need to lead with listening. If you're going to be a leader in the workplace, whether or not you have the title of a leader or not, you need to actively listen to people. Active listening is one of those things to me, before I really learned about it, I was kind of skeptical. Similar to breathing exercises. When people say breathing exercises are this miraculous thing that can totally change you and stabilize your nervous system and all that, they're not kidding. It's true. But when I first heard of that, I thought, well, I breathe all the time, every day. You know, how am I breathing wrong? Same thing with listening. That was my initial kind of skeptical response was, what do you mean active listening? Like, I know how to listen to people. How hard could it be to listen to people? So that's what we're going to look at today. What exactly is active listening? How's it different than just hearing people? And how can you develop the skill of active listening? And of course, why is it so important to develop the skill of active listening? So this week's episode is entitled Active Listening in Action. Okay, so as always, we're going to give you a concept, a tool you can use, but then at the end, we're going to emphasize how do you put this into action? And I've got a couple of different steps that you can take. So when we talk about active listening, and actually, part of the reason I'm doing this as the topic this week is I'm currently teaching our Keystone Communication series, and active listening is one of the keystone skills in that series. And so I got great feedback from the participants on this. And one of the things that we talked to the participants about, first and foremost, is simply this: why do we communicate? Now, if you're a Better Workdays diehard fan, you may remember we talked about this in our episode on managing your fear of public speaking. We talked about why do we present? And it's the same question. Why do we communicate? Why do we present? And we answered it in that episode. So you may be ahead of the game if you're a diehard and you're taking notes every week. All right. If you didn't listen to that episode, why do we communicate? Why? I'm talking about as big a picture look at this as you can take. If you consider the human animal, right, there's really only two reasons we ever communicate. We ever consciously share a message from us to someone else. And those two reasons are this: we communicate to inform, and we communicate to encourage a specific action. Now, when I went over this with the folks in our workshop, they made the great point. I kind of presented it as two different things. You know, we communicate to inform, or we communicate to encourage a specific action. And the participants got me thinking about it with their feedback, that really, whenever you're doing one of these, you're also doing the other. And I said, if you consider the human animal. So if you think of it from an evolutionary perspective, right? When we started communicating verbally, it's the same as any animal in the wild. What are we doing? We're informing. Look out, there's a predator. Why? Because we're encouraging a specific action. Get the hell out of here. Run up that tree. So from our earliest evolutionary stages, we've been communicating to inform and encourage a specific action. And it's you know, we're not living in caves anymore. But now in the corporate offices and boardrooms, it's still the case. Anytime you're sharing a message with someone, you're trying to inform them of something, and you're trying to encourage a specific action. You know, let's say you tell someone that their outfit looks great that day. You're informing them of your opinion of the outfit. What's the specific action you're encouraging? You're encouraging them to keep dressing that way. You're encouraging them to maybe feel pretty good about themselves. You see how it's always going to be connected. You're going to inform, and there's going to be a specific action that's attached to that. I challenge you, think of a time today. Just think about the day you're having when you communicated with another person. Were you informing them, and were you encouraging explicitly or implicitly a specific action. I think you're going to be hard pressed to find examples where that wasn't the case. And what the participants helped me realize was when we communicate to inform and encourage a specific action, that's true communication. When we are just making noise, then we don't have the intent to inform and we don't have the intent to encourage a specific action. That's the difference between communication and simply making noise. You're trying to inform someone of something and you're trying to encourage a specific action. So, if that, in a nutshell, at its very core, is why we communicate, then the next question, why do we listen? And that is an even simpler answer. We listen to understand. We have to listen to the other person. We have to listen to the message they're sharing to understand what they are trying to inform us of and what specific action they are trying to encourage us to take. That's why you need to lead with listening. You can't lead people that you don't understand, and you can't understand people if you're not listening to them. So, this is a great quote from Bryant McGill. One of the sincerest forms of respect is actually listening to what another has to say. And I try to drive that home to people in our leadership development workshops. If you're going to respect your employees, you've got to listen to what they have to say. Doesn't mean you're a doormat. It doesn't mean they're allowed to be in your ear all day, every day. But when someone's trying to communicate with you, when they've got a genuine concern, you got to listen to them because they're trying to inform you of something and they're trying to encourage a specific action. And the greatest way you can show respect to somebody is by actually listening to them, actively listening to them. So here's an exercise for you, okay? And you can pause the podcast if you want to. I run this in our workshop. We do this exercise before we even get into defining active listening. I tell people, all right, Real Custom Training, we are starting the Great Listeners Hall of Fame, the great listeners of all time, the great listeners. We're going to start here in Northeastern Connecticut, the great listeners in Northeastern Connecticut. All right. And I asked the workshop participants, give me some nominees, give me some people from your life, could be personal, could be professional. Give me the great listeners in your life, the people you consider truly great listeners, nominate them for the Hall of Fame. And then as a group, we're going to share our nominations and we're going to talk about what it is about those folks that made them such great listeners. But so you can pause here and think about this. Just jot it down on paper if you want to. Who are some of the great listeners in your life? Okay. After you've done that exercise, I'm going to ask you these questions, which I ask the people in our workshop. Of the three people, well, if you nominated three, but even if you nominated one, okay, the people or person you nominated, do they fit into any of these categories? Are they someone you like a lot? Are they someone you love? Are they someone you respect? And are they someone that you like to work with? In many, many cases, it's 3 out of 4. The loved one's a little hit or miss. Usually if you're listing people you work with, you may not say you love them. But a lot of people who do this exercise in our workshop, their dad's on the list, their sibling, their best friend, and they love those people. So the point is that when you think about the great listeners in your life, and then you think about the people you like, love, respect, and like to work with the most, you're going to find a lot of overlap. Okay. And I do that exercise with them and I'm doing it with you just to highlight the fact that I think listening is undervalued as a skill. But if you look at who you like, love, respect, and love to work with, you're going to find active listeners are right there in the mix. Now, let's define active listening, all right? To me, here's the definition I use in our workshop. It's a commitment that we're going to use listening as our number one tool in order to understand things from the speaker's point of view. That's active listening, when you're committed to using it as your primary tool to generate understanding between you and another person. It's not the same as hearing. Hearing's a physical process. Hearing just means sounds, entering your ears and maybe sort of being processed by your brain, but that's not listening. Listening has to be active. You've got to decide to tune in and do your best to listen for shared understanding. So you can really think of active listening as an attitude that you're taking with you into the workplace. Your attitude is that when someone's communicating with you, you're blocking everything else out. Think of the last episode we did where we talked about the Zorro circle, where you put the one most important thing in the world in that circle and that's all you focus on. When you're doing active listening with somebody and you're really trying to lock in and listen to them, imagine that they are in your Zorro circle. They're the most important thing in the universe. as they're communicating with you. That's the type of attitude that encapsulates active listening. So, action steps for you. All right. If you want to start practicing active listening, number one, you got to make the decision to listen. You have to make the decision to listen. And I'll ask you this: if you make that decision, what does that internal commitment sound like to you? I personally, when I started trying to really commit to doing more active listening, I started telling myself when someone would talk, I would kind of pretend and I would think, all right, there's $1,000,000 in it for me. If I can listen to this person, and let's say I'm going to get quizzed after this conversation on where they were coming from, how they really feel about this topic, what they're trying to inform me of, what specific action they're trying to encourage me to take. There's $1,000,000 quiz at the end of this, and I better do my best to get that $1,000,000. Just that type of mental exercise to help you lock in. And it could sound different for you, but the point is you're making some type of internal commitment when that communication starts to remind yourself, oh, yeah. Let me turn on active listening mode here. Let me lock in and listen. All right. Don't interrupt people. That's a key step. Do not interrupt people unless it's totally necessary to enhance your understanding. Okay. Some active listening advice that you might see out there on good old LinkedIn, it'll say, don't interrupt ever. I think that's silly. No, let's say somebody's starting to communicate with you and you're lost on something. You're not sure if they're describing Frank or Grace. It's okay to interrupt to say, hold on a second. Hold on. Are we talking about Frank or are we talking about Grace here? All right. Remember, the goal is to better understand them. So if you need to interrupt to ask a question, do it, as long as it's going to enhance your understanding. Most of the time when people interrupt, it's because they're listening to respond. They're not listening to understand. And you need to get away from that if you're going to be a better active listener. And I know that that is difficult. If you've got the, shiny object syndrome like I do, where you're easily distracted, okay, and that can include with your train of thought, it can be very easy to bounce all over the place, and then you're not listening to someone, you're kind of just waiting to jump in and talk. We all do that, but active listening means getting a handle on that. So no interrupting, all right, and listen to understand. Don't just listen to respond. And then keep your eyes focused on the speaker and your ears tuned to their voice. I'm going to give you another caveat here on this one. You don't need to stare at the person speaking the whole time. All right. Don't, take all these things with a grain of salt. Eye contact does show that you're listening, but taking notes also shows you're listening. I've also had lots of people in workshops, and I do this too. I'm a note taker. Okay. And sometimes I'm just a doodler. So you might look at me, let's say I'm in a meeting and someone's speaking and I'm not staring at them. I'm not keeping my eyes focused on them the whole time. That speaker might look at me and see me with my head down and see my pen moving. They might say Andy's taking notes. They might say Andy's working on something else. They might say it looks like Andy's drawing some kind of weird flower over there or some weird geometric pattern. Okay. That can look like I'm not paying attention, but for some of us, and a lot of people in my workshops tell me this is the case for them too. For some of us, that actually helps us focus. Okay. By giving our eyes something to focus on other than the speaker, giving our hand something to do, that actually can help us keep an ear on the person. So I would tell you, keep your ear tuned to their voice. I don't have a caveat for that. You have to do that. You absolutely have to keep your ear tuned to the speaker. The eyes, I would say you can be a little less concerned about keeping your eyes on the speaker the whole time, but you definitely occasionally want to be looking up and giving them some indication that you're listening, especially if you're like me and you tend to have your head and your hand buried in a notebook. Definitely give them some cues that you are listening, because if you do any type of public speaking, you know how torturous it can be to be speaking and nobody's looking at you, nobody's nodding, and you're desperately looking for cues that people are hanging in there with you. So throw your speaker a bone, give them that cue once in a while that you are paying attention, but don't feel like you have to follow the classic active listening advice of keeping your eyes on them the whole time. Okay. And you got to know your audience too. Someone in a workshop this past week told me, they said, they were like, eye contact freaks me out. I don't like making eye contact with people. So once I knew that about them, as I'm engaging with them in the workshop, I'm going to be less apt to make and keep eye contact with them. So as I'm going to say this probably in every episode, like none of this stuff's set in stone. Customize it for yourself, customize it for your audience. But keeping your ears tuned to their voice, that's as close to set in stone as we ever get. There's really no getting around that with active listening. Keep your ears tuned to their voice. So, some simple action steps, right? Make the decision to listen. Don't interrupt people unless it's going to enhance your understanding. Keep your eyes focused on them if you can. Keep your ears tuned to them at all time. Simple, right? Well, maybe simple on paper on my slide deck here. All right. But a little pop wisdom for you this week in terms of active listening and how seemingly simple these steps are. One of my favorite movies at the moment, it is quickly joined the Batman, the Lord of the Rings movies, Billy Madison, Peacemaker season 1, the Suicide Squad movie, the Nolan Batman movies, Deadwood. This is almost an embarrassing long list. This is my list of stuff that I can just put on, I can watch over and over again. And the latest and greatest member of that prestigious group is Dune Part 2. All right. So there's a line in Dune Part 2 that I love. Chani, played by Zendaya, great role. She's talking to Paul Atreides, the Timothy Chalamet character. Chani's part of the Fremen. All right, that's a tribe of people. Paul's an outsider, and he wants to be assimilated into the Fremen. And she is kind of agreeing to take him under her wing, show him how to live as a Fremen.
You know, I'm the only one who believes you're going to make it until summer. Everyone else thinks you won't make it 2 weeks. If you want to follow us in the desert, you need to know how wind traps work. So listen to me. They're simple, but they require constant attention.
They're simple, but they require constant attention. I love that quote so much. They're simple, but they require constant attention. That applies to so many of the leadership concepts and principles that we help people develop at Real Custom Training. Again, let's go back. Look at these action steps for active listening. Make the decision to listen. Don't interrupt people. Keep your eyes and your ears focused. Simple, right? As Chani says, they're simple. The wind traps are simple. The steps for active listening are simple. But in both cases, the wind traps and active listening, they require constant attention. And that is not so simple. So simple to conceptualize, simple to wrap your head around, not so simple to execute. They require constant attention. Active listening and really dedicating yourself to it, it may be a simple concept, but it's going to require constant attention, just like the wind traps that the Fremen use. And that's going to be true of pretty much everything we ever talk about on Better Workdays and every workshop we ever run at Real Custom Training. We're going to be putting fairly simple concepts in front of people. Then we're going to try to help you with the immensely difficult aspect of it, which is the action, the implementation, taking these simple things and consistently using them, paying constant attention to them. That's what it takes to be an active listener and really to be a leader in the workplace. It requires constant attention, simple as it may seem on paper. And if you haven't seen Dune or Dune Part 2, I can't recommend them enough. Great movies. So, action steps. A little bit, we can call this extra credit for you, okay? The other ones I definitely want you to do if you're going to work on active listening. Make the commitment to listen, don't interrupt people, and keep your eyes and ears focused on the speaker, right? If you want some extra credit, though, here's a cool exercise you can do, all right? Get a notebook, dedicate it to active listening, right? As you have work discussions throughout the day, try not to use that notebook to capture notes in real time. Don't be like me, constantly taking notes in meetings, okay? To build up your active listening skills, have the conversations, lock yourself in, do your best active listening. As soon as you can, when that conversation is done, go to your notebook, write down the discussion. What were you talking about? What was the subject? What was the person informing you about? What action were they encouraging? Who spoke more? All right. If you did most of the speaking, you could work on that. A good sign of an active listener is that you are not doing all the speaking. Okay. And then what'd you learn in the discussion? And you want to hit the classic who, what, where, when, why, and how of the conversation. The key here is that you're capturing this information after the conversation has taken place. I had one of our participants come back the next week after I introduced this exercise in a workshop. And she said she did it for the whole week. And she said it really helped her with the active listening because she knew mentally, again, what mental commitment, what mental game you're going to play with yourself to get locked in. This became her game. where she was having a conversation with someone at work and she knew, all right, I got to capture this in the notebook later. So let me lock in, really listen to this person and really try to understand them. And she said it was a great exercise that worked out. And I love that because I try these things and sometimes they help me out. So then I say, okay, I think it'll help other people. But it means the world to me and our instructors when people come back to us and say, I tried that out and you know what? It really did help. So that's your extra credit action step this week. Get your notebook, start logging your conversations after you have them. And that's going to start training your brain to really pay attention and really do active listening so that you can get an accurate summary of that conversation in your notebook after the fact. So start today. You can use these action steps to build up your own active listening skills. All right, that's it for this week. Thank you for tuning in. As always, subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music. Follow us on Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram. And we will be back next week with another episode of Better Workdays.